Hello, I am so honored and humbled to have all of you assembled today. Today is going to be a live stream of our Freedom Forum about banned books. And it's also going to be our 100th podcast of the Freedom Writers Podcast. And as we sat down to think of a subject matter worthy of such a milestone, we got a call from a disgruntled and desperate teacher about the Freedom Writers Diary being challenged, a librarian in her community getting a death threat, and her books being taken off the shelf. And so we rallied and we thought, let's make it of substance. Let's find a book that is worthy of this discussion by an author or authors who have also had their words challenged. And so I'm so giddy that we found the perfect book, the perfect authors to have a really courageous conversation about censorship, about banning books, about the daring dialogues we need to have in our libraries, our homes, and our classrooms, and in a civil society. And so, for those of you that are not familiar with the book, and then by the book, we will introduce our authors. I'm going to hold it up, is this exquisite book called And Tango Makes Three. And Tango Makes Three is a true story, which we'll find out about these incredible penguins at the Central Park Zoo in New York, and these incredible authors who wanted to shed a light and a profound discussion on family. Because in Freedom Writer World, family is what we make, family is what we choose, different shapes, sizes, colors, and hues. And so when Dr. Justin Richardson and Peter Parnell said, we need to turn this story of Roy and Silo and Baby Tango into a book, it was a phenomenon. It was a phenomenon. It's a phenomenon today as well. In 2005, this book came out to critical acclaim. And just recently, Joy Behar decided this was her first choice on The View for banned books. So, how did something become a phenomenon and then become banned? So, we're going to have that discussion today by a celebrated playwright, an exquisite psychiatrist with Columbia University, and we're going to talk about censorship, and we're going to be fielding questions from our audience as well. So, I want to dive in with these exquisite writers who have chosen to write something that is about family, that love is love is love. And sometimes love is challenged, and sometimes love is dismissed. So, Justin and Peter, thank you for joining us today on such a celebratory time about a subject that I hold dear. I taught banned books, I will teach your book, but I'm also sad that we have to have that word banned be in front of the word book. So, thank you for joining us today. Thank you for writing this sensation. And I want to dive in first and foremost with you about what made the two of you decide to publish this book. It is exquisite, and I want to know the backstory about that journey.
Okay.
Okay.
Well,
Well,
thank
thank
you
you.
for that incredibly
Yeah.
generous welcome
Yes.
and introduction. And we're honored to be here and to get to talk to you and to be the 100th show of your amazing
Yeah.
podcast. So, yeah, well, let's dive in. I mean, here's so the backstory. The backstory is that I'm a psychiatrist in New York, and in 1994, I proposed to Columbia University that we create a center for lesbian mental health, and it was the first academic center for gay and lesbian mental health in a university hospital, and attention. And there were some schools in New York City at the time who heard about the center, and they for they asked me and a few other folks at Columbia if we could come to meet with the heads of these schools. They were three independent girls' schools. And if we could talk to them about how to talk to their about HIV and AIDS. And I said, okay. And we went to this meeting, and they were the heads of these well-known schools, and they, wanted to know how to educate their. I thought that was amazing. And I think our first question was, so I understand you want to talk about HIV and AIDS. Can you tell us what you've been teaching about sexual orientation, just to start. And there was kind of a embarrassed silence, and they said, well, we haven't really gotten around to that yet. And we said, okay, so that's a great place to start, to think about how to talk about sexual orientation development at all ages. These are schools that were from kindergarten. Let's think about what's a way to talk to the kids, to talk to the teachers about talking to the kids, and to talk to the parents about the fact that we're talking to the teachers about talking to the kids. And that led to a series of talks that I gave in New York and in other states, and Massachusetts and Virginia and in California, to parents at a lot of schools about sexual orientation development. And one of the things that I noticed, there are a lot of parents who were anxious about talking about sexual orientation uh, in a way that wouldn't be age appropriate. That was the phrase that kept coming up. So these were to these talks who very much wanted to be able to talk to kids about, you have a friend who has two moms. Let's talk about what that means. But they didn't know the right words, and they really that it was risky to use the wrong words. And sometimes parents would say, you know, what could we have our kids read? Uh, and at the time, there really wasn't much. There wasn't much. And so that was in the background when one Saturday we were at breakfast and we opened up the New York Times. And I think in those days,
It was,
section.
yes. Yeah.
And on the cover of the Arts and Ideas section was a photograph of Roy and Silo. And the article by Denisha Smith was entitled, "Love That Dare Not Squeak Its Name."
Oh, how clever. And while you say Roy and Silo, I'm going to hold up your book.
Yeah.
Because that is Roy and Silo.
That's
right.
Roy and Silo.
That's right.
So I read the first two paragraphs and I said, oh, Peter, who was reading something at the book review probably, I said, Peter, you have to hear this story. And I read the story of Roy and Silo to Peter. And I think there was something about just reading and the elements of the story, two cute animals that really wanted something that, but then they got it. It just in that moment, I thought, this is a picture book. This is a picture book, and this is the book that those parents have so they can introduce this subject in a way that they'll feel comfortable. And I think we did. We should probably write this today. And so we sat down and we that Saturday.
Yeah, we wrote the first
You know
draft
what?
pretty quickly, but then it took off, from there. So it's,
You know what I love about you, Peter? Peter, you are the esteemed writer of the family. You are the playwright. You are a producer. You're working on shows at that time like West Wing. And so I want to quote a line, and I don't know which one of you wrote it, but it's one of my favorite lines from your book. Families of all kinds. I think that was my favorite line, families of all kinds. So which of you came up with that line, families of all kinds?
we do we even know? The thing is, us feels like a long time ago, but we also worked in this wonderful way where we sort of did our versions of how we would see what the story, to tell the story, and then we sort of back and read aloud to each other and went over it and over it. So it would be very hard for me as a playwright. Any playwright can tell you it's mostly about rewriting. It's not just once you have your first draft, you're able to then say, oh, this is really what the story is about. So this is how I have to make it better or make it go to that purpose. And I think that's what we did. We had a pretty quick first draft and then careful work.
We did one of the things that was interesting to us and that was a challenge was to think about how are you going to tell this story? Because there are so many different ways of talking about animals and whether you give an animal a voice in a story or not. And we considered the possibility that these animals were characters who could speak for themselves. And we were torn and to his room and I went to my room and I wrote the version that had no anthropomorphization. And Peter wrote a story about two gay men in tuxedos who happened to be penguins who went to the opera and wanted to have a child. And I think we sort of got that out of our system.
Not that we go to the opera.
Not that we don't.
We do not.
We got that version system, and that was very helpful because one of the things, one of the notes that we worked on, our editor and from other early readers was, let's really try to take out any anthropomorphization in this story and keep it very pure and true to what actually happened. Sort of a North Star for us as we were thinking about how to tell the story.
What I love about the story, though, it's tender. You know, I love the visualization of they mate for life, and they go to sleep together, and they wake up together. It was just such a sweet celebration that love is love is love. So, for our young audience who live in a city, country, or community where books are being banned, and they've not been exposed to this book, you know, our hope is they will run to the internet or to a bookstore and buy this book. Can you tell them the true story about the rock versus the egg, and what Roy and Silo actually did in reality that you gave a beautiful tribute to?
Sure. Well, Roy and Silo became best friends and pair bonded in the sense they came together and they ate together and they together, and they clearly also at that when male and female penguins were becoming family or creating eggs, they had an instinct, and that instinct was to do something like that, to hatch a rock. And Rob Gramsay, who was at that time the zookeeper for the Arctic zone and the penguin house, noted, and he realized that if he took a fertilizer, there was another penguin couple who were only able to hatch one egg at a time, and he took a fertilized egg from them and gave it to Silo. They had built a nest of stones. They had tried to hatch a rock. He gave them the egg. They sat on it. The things that you do when you're about to have a chick, and that became Tango. And once Tango was born, there's a period in which the chick is with parents primarily, and then eventually into the penguin house at the zoo. And so it was Roy, Silo, and Tango until to the penguin house, which we visited a number of times to see them. Yeah.
I think another line that I love was, because it takes two to make a tango. It is so thoughtful and pithy and clever. And so, which of you want to claim that line? Was that part of the
thing was,
creative process?
Yeah, I mean, Rob, you can say the other name. I mean, they named the penguins have the names at the zoo, and Tango was Tango, so it seemed like the natural, since it was about a couple having a chick, it seemed like the natural.
One of the things about the names that's so interesting, and it speaks to the story, is that penguins are not sexually dimorphic. Male penguins look like female penguins. It's extremely tell them apart. When they're born, the zookeepers at the Central Park Zoo don't know what sex the penguin is. And in the I think in the 70s and in the 80s, they kind of guessed, and they gave them gendered names, and they were quite often wrong. And so they sort of moved to ungendered names, like Tango. But one of the things that made this story possible was really the sensitivity of Gramsay, who saw a penguin couple. They were engaging in courtship behaviors like the other penguin couples. There's think that they were unusual until he observed over time that they were not laying an egg. And then he observed them take this rock, and bring it to the nest of stones and try to hatch that rock. And then he understood these two can't lay an egg of their own. And he was very intentional and careful. I have to say, he wanted to make sure them the chance to hatch an egg, that they'd be able to do it. So after the episode with the rock, there's a part of the story which we don't tell, which is that he took a dummy fake egg and he gave it to them, and he saw them put it in their nest, and he observed whether they had the ability with it over the course of the month that it takes to hatch, and to see if they would take turns and if they would turn it, if they knew what to do. And he saw that they did. And it was then that he, okay, Betty and Porky have never been able to hatch both of their eggs. They often lay two eggs. One falls out of the nest, gets cracked, gets ruined. So he thought, I'm going to do right by that egg, and I'm going to bring him to this foster family, and I know that these guys can hatch it. So that's, all to the credit of Rob Gramsay, who, his action was then followed in zoos around the world by other zookeepers who learned from him that you could do this sort of thing. And so there are other, Tango honorary siblings
right.
in Germany and elsewhere. But it was really Rob's insight that made this whole story possible.
Yeah, as an English teacher, I love the story behind the story. And as an English teacher, trying to encourage my original freedom writers to read. I love talking about banned books, and often those were the books that we read in my English class. So I actually want to ask my first question from one of my original freedom writers, and his name is Narada. And so Narada has a question for you. He said, do you really think a person listens and never reads a banned book? And before you answer that question, we've told anyone who submitted a question in advance that we are going to send them a banned book. So I'm going to send Narada, who has both a son in high school and a daughter in elementary school. I'm going to send Narada's daughter a copy of And Tango Makes Three. So that's the book that he's going to get for submitting the question. But I love that my original freedom writer, Narada, is challenging. Do you think people are really listening to when they ban books and they stay away, or do you think it makes them want to read it that much more?
Well, I mean, we've certainly when the book, so there was such a connection that we made with readers, and the response was very positive. So wonderful. There was a community that we felt was embracing the story and the book, and I think after the book started getting pulled or taken public school or school libraries, there was also that response, which is of people who wanted to know what that story is. And there is that give and take that happens. There's a response. You're told not to do something in a way, then you want to find out why.
Yeah, one of the things that one of the ironies of this was that the first time the book was, and it wasn't banned, it challenged in a library in Missouri.
Yeah.
Rolling Hills.
Rolling Hills, yeah.
It was a parent had taken the book home, and the parent, surprised and unhappy with the book, and went back to the library and said to the librarian, this book shouldn't be available for kids. This is inappropriate, and something about it. And the librarian looked at the book and thought about it and decided she would take it out of the nonfiction, out of the storybook section, the fiction section, which was the most popular section for little kids. And she put it in nonfiction with other books on birds. Intended not to browse the nonfiction section. And she thought that way nobody will be, she used the word blindsided.
Wow.
Now, is that there was somebody who, God bless them, a stringer for a local newspaper whose job was to go over of the library meeting minutes. That was that journalist's job in journalism, reading these minutes, and saw this story and thought, huh, that's interesting. Interviewed the librarian, wrote the story. The story got picked up by the Associated Press. The story traveled literally around the globe, that this librarian had tried to hide our book. And in doing so, in the act of trying to make our book less visible to students, brought international attention to the book. And that is one of the ironies about these book challenges, is that thank goodness they are covered in the media. And when they do come to the attention of people who never would have heard about the book, never would have had a chance to read the book. And so in some ways, yes, they're taken away from some people, but they're also brought to other people. Then it takes away.
I'm so glad you said that, because we had an interesting moment where in Independence, Iowa, this mother, a single mom working for John Deere, the tractor company, had checked out our book from the local library, gave it to her teenage daughters, and then life got in the way, and she never turned it in, and she moved to another community. There was a warrant for her arrest. They arrested her. There was a mugshot. And I was driving one day, and on NPR, they talked about this single mom in Independence, Iowa, who was arrested for not turning in the Freedom Writer's Diary. And the Freedom Writers and I thought, we have to rally. We have to go to Iowa. We not only have to have a town hall, we have to meet this cranky librarian, but we also have to give homage to a mother who just desperately wanted her kids to read our book. And so I love that the city, the town, the story, because it's an affront to the beauty that you put in the world.
Yeah.
So tell me about another interesting place in the world when your book has had either controversy or a challenge.
Well, one of the first ones that we really became aware of is in Loudoun County, which is in Virginia. And the school there, the school chancellor there had, after complaints, had removed the book. And there were LGBTQIA that responded, and we didn't get involved directly. Communicate through the ACLU, through the American Library Association, to contact the schools and to let them know that there was a violation if they were going to be doing that. Amendment, the Constitution, and it was really, that was one of a number of cases where it went to a, and then I think whether it was their legal teams or became aware that this wouldn't stand, but of course the book could be returned.
Yeah, there started to be a pattern that we became familiar with, and thankfully we were educated in this by a woman named Judy Krug, who was then the head of the Office of Intellectual Freedom of the American Library Association. It was an amazing woman, and this was her life's work to stand up for books like this. But what would happen, there would be a complaint about the book to the attention of the school. The school board would start to have a discussion as to what would be the process to decide whether to take the book out of the library or to keep the book in the library. And at some point in that process, it may have been the lawyer for the school, it may have been the local chapter of the ACLU or Penn, say, hey, actually, you can't take the book out of the library because it's a violation of the Constitution. This is
you don't whisper that. Shout it to the heavens. For any teacher that is listening, lean in, because I don't know if teachers know that it's illegal to do that.
Yeah,
so
well,
say that again and say it loud and say it proud.
In the 1980s, there was a case that was brought against a school that had removed a book, and the students who wanted to read that book, and a plurality of Supreme Court justices found that it was of the First Amendment of the Constitution to take this book out of a library. So while it is true that a school can decide not to put a book in a library, it is not okay for a school to take a book out of a library. That's the precedent, right?
Wow.
And so I think we felt, I think it took a lot of the sting out of these challenges because we thought, okay, we're in America and our Constitution is behind us. And so we felt very, very protected. And I think we felt maybe a little bit unfairly superior when there was a huge brouhaha about Tango Makes Three. And the government announced that they were taking all of the copies of Tango Makes Three out of all of the libraries in Singapore and pulping them. And one of the spokespersons for the government said, she gave a lovely interview in which she said, pulping, recycling, and no disrespect to the book is intended. But this story of really what we think is the sort of the most effective kind of response to a book ban. Yes, lawyers can come in and say, this is not cool. Yes, authors from New York can write a letter or an op-ed piece or something. But what really works is when people in that community organize and make a fuss. And what happened in Singapore was a large group of parents got together and brought their kids in their PJs to the National Library of Singapore, read in where they had their kids on their laps and they were reading our book and two other books that were also slated to be pulped. It was covered by the media in Singapore, and the government relented and said, okay, we won't pulp the book. And I think, for anybody who's listening and thinks like, I'm powerless to this, I would say, really, truly, you are not. And these sorts of actions by readers, by parents, by kids are effective. They really are. And in some ways, they're more moving and therefore more effective than authorities coming in or authors coming in from out of town and saying what you're doing is wrong.
I'm so glad you said that, because I think for us, it's we the collective freedom writer family have this moment of righteous indignation, and we want, we named ourselves in honor of the civil rights advocates, freedom writers of the 60s. Right. So we feel like we have to jump on a plane and fly to that community, which we've done. Yeah. Ironically, I want to read of a teacher sent a question. He's been teaching for over 30 years. And just last year, our book was being challenged to be banned in his community. He lives and works in Crete, Nebraska. Mm-hmm. And sweet Paul Smith said, not on my watch. We're going to galvanize. And so when I asked him, who would you like the book to be dedicated to? He actually chose his superintendent, because they did rally. They got the intelligentsia of the community that was challenging our book, The Freedom Writer's Diary, being challenged in Crete, Nebraska. So here is his question for you. He says, how does a teacher overcome a sudden, quote unquote, fear by a community or school board when it comes to books? And he wants to dedicate his copy of The Freedom Writer's Diary to his superintendent, Dr. Josh McDowell, because they fought and they won, and the Freedom Writer Diary gets to stay on the shelf in his classroom. So can you tell other teachers who may be going through controversy right now, like Paul Smith did in Nebraska, what can they do when there is controversy, a challenge, or a removal?
This is a really good question. And I wish there were an easy answer, but I think one of the things we're concerned about is we don't want anybody to lose their job, and teachers are in a vulnerable position in some communities. And I think that's the thing you have to think about first is, is my job safe? Is my principal going to stand up for me? Stand up for me? Is my superintendent going to stand up for me? And really think that through, because look, we'd love for everybody to fight for our book. And at the same time, you've got to put meals on the table for your family. And so, to just really be conscientious about that and understand you don't have to fight. You don't have think about this one and think about if this is your fight to fight. And if it is your fight, there will be a lot of people nationally who will line up and will support you. And there's a lot of resources to help you. Like, what are your talking points and why this book? But it's such a personal decision as to whether or not you feel you have the support in the school and whether or not you feel like, you want this to be your fight and you want to take a risk to do it. I mean, I think, you know, we have felt there are times that neck outs for this book, and it's because we felt we just couldn't quite live with ourselves if we, that's a personal decision, and I love it when people make that decision. But I also respect people saying, you know what, can't, that's okay too.
I I chose some lines from folks who are authors of banned books that I think that we can relate to. And one of them I love was by Stephen Chomsky, and it was, banning books gives us silence when we need speech. It closes our ears when we need to listen. It makes us blind when we need sight. So I want to talk to you about the community in which you were asked in 1994 to address. And in those schools and in those homes, the silent killer oftentimes in the LGBTQIA plus community was not having those conversations, was not having beautiful blended families that were tender and loving.
Yeah.
And as a psychiatrist, Dr. Richardson, you know that firsthand, when those conversations are not had and books are banned, that the suicide rate in that community is one of the highest.
Yeah.
So it is a sense of urgency. Books save lives. So
Yeah.
for you as both a doctor and an activist and an author and a husband and a father and a humanitarian, do you believe that books save lives?
Oh yeah. So I think, listen, the suicide attempts among adolescents who identify as LGBTQIA is incontrovertible. That's there, and it's the highest quality data that comes from a that's conducted every 2 years by the CDC. That's a very serious risk. At the same time, we can focus on suicide and forget about all of the other ways in which we want to support the development of gay youth. And I will just speak personally about this. Like, Peter and I grew up without And Tango Makes Three, but I had Ferdinand. I had a bull that didn't want to fight like the other boy bulls, but liked to sit and smell the flowers. So I know that a book can be for a kid. If a child can see themselves in a book and see themselves being celebrated in a book, even if there's nobody who looks or acts like them, or nobody in their classroom who looks or acts like them, they know that they exist in the world and that they can be respected. And that's huge. Like, that's what gets kids through, like being teased by their peers. After I had Ferdinand, I was lucky to grow up with Frida Be You and Me, the Marlo Thomas compendium, which had a story, William Wants a Doll, and It's All Right to Cry. So I know just personally, I didn't need to be protected from suicide, but I grew with the comfort of knowing about these books and having these books at home. And I think Peter probably had similar experiences.
Yes. Well, I had Petunia, of course, who got a book and didn't know what to do with it. And learned the hard way, she did, but wonderful book. But I loved picture books growing up. They were very important to me. I did, Ferdinand was one of my favorites, but I don't think I was aware of why, but it was definitely helpful.
My next question comes from an activist in the classroom. She is the former Miami-Dade Teacher of the Year, and her name is Dr. Precious Simonette. And she is now in a state under siege with the Don't Say Gay bill. And originally it was going to be from kindergarten to third grade. And a couple of weeks ago, they extended it to K-12.
Yeah.
And so I love that she's an activist. I love that she's a celebrated teacher. I love that she's a freedom writer teacher. And she had several of her students participate in our book called Dear Freedom Writer. And several of the stories in our new book deal with love in all its forms and fashions and pronouns and the choice. And so our question for you from Dr. Precious Simonette, and she's dedicating this book to her student Amari. Dr. Precious Simonette wants to ask you, why is it important to read banned books?
Yes, we we vacation on Cape Cod each year for a couple of weeks, and we were in Wellfleet, where we go. We went to a toy store a few years ago, this was, and we found this mug. I saw this mug, and it said books on it. This is from the Unemployed Philosophers Guild, which is a company that does interesting and unusual things. Books mug, and the books that are on this mug were at one time or another in some way. We're talking about books like the books here, The Catcher in the Rye, The Origin of Species, Lolita, 1984. These are Huckleberry Finn, Lady Chatterley's Lover. We hear about the cases in which many of these books were in trouble in some way, and our book, we were tickled to see that in the next to Kill a Mockingbird is Tango Makes Three.
That gives me chills.
So that was nice. So yeah, but the point is, these books are Tango aside, the bedrock, our culture of they are what did we say? These are masterpieces that we would be lost without. Yeah. And so that we're talking about the potential of that when it's taken away, when a book is taken off a shelf.
I mean, try to imagine a society that never had The Origin of Species or 1984 or Ulysses or Galileo's thesis, right? Or the Satanic Verses.
Wow.
That's why these books are important, right? Because if you try to picture our world without ever having had any of those books, it's very gray. It's a very gray.
That leads me to another quote I got this morning. This is by Eugene O'Neill. And Eugene said, censorship of anything at any time, in any place, on whatever pretense, has always been and always will be the last resort of the boob and the bigot. And so I think, so when I think of, politicians and pundits who are targeting both of our books in the state of Florida, I love that we are both on the same wavelength. So we actually got a question from Allie, who works at Waldorf University, and she lives in a community, or she lived in a community in Florida. She's since moved, that both of our books have been banned. And so her question to you is, we see the banning of books happening not across the board, but in pockets throughout the country. Long term, think of college and life thereafter. How will students from areas where these works are banned stack up against their peers from areas where they had exposure to these banned books? Which I think is a really great question for someone who does work in a progressive university like Waldorf. So for those that don't have exposure to the Freedom Writer's Diary or Tango Makes Three or all of those books on the cover of your cup, what do you think the difference will be?
Yeah, well, I think yes. I mean, that's the question. It's a really good comment and question because, and it's playing itself out now more and more. When we started hearing about the cases for Tango, this was early, and it was sort of a case-by-case situation. And what's happening now is, I think, for reasons that are much more politically cynical, are enormous lists now of books that are being removed old to be reviewed. And again, we're talking, I mean, like the mug, I mean, we're talking about Toni Morrison, we're talking about great writers. And with if you're not reading those writers, it's going to affect the enrichment of your own life, but your future in terms of how you are a member of our culture, of our society.
Yeah. I mean, think about also just the message that's being communicated to children about literature, which is literature is potentially bad. Literature can be dangerous. Literature is to be avoided or to be very, very carefully around, which is the exact opposite message that we want to give kids we want to educate, right? Literature is rich. Literature is to be devoured. Literature is consumed critically. I mean, that's what we want, right? Consume it critically. If you're concerned about a book, that's a book I think you want to share, right? So that you can help children develop their own discernment about what they think is right, what they think is valuable, and what is not. That we certainly want to imbue in our daughter is look at that thing and tell me what you think. That's education.
Absolutely. Well, I'm thinking in honor of your beautiful daughter, Gemma, who is going to go into the ninth grade, the age in which I began this freedom writer journey. I also think of Judy Blume, and I was just in Key West and got to go to her incredible independent bookstore. And I love that she is on every banned book list. I love that she is a fighter. I hope that you've taken Gemma to see Are You There, God? It's Me, Margaret, one of those pivotal books for every middle school girl in the world. But I want to share a Judy Blume classic. This is her line. She said, "It's not just the books under fire now that worry me. It's the books that will never be read, and all due to fear of censorship. As always, young readers will be the real losers." So think about your daughter. Think about your daughter going off to high school and imagine books that you love and have treasured, and some teacher being told that your daughter can't read these books. As parents now, how do you feel? Does that activism go up another notch?
Well, I think, first of all, I want to say I grew up reading Judy Blume books, and it was so exciting to me. We were invited by the American Library Association to do year after year a readout in Chicago of the books, and Judy Blume was there, and we were reading our book alongside Judy Blume reading her book,
and Stephen Chbosky,
and Stephen
well,
Chbosky,
Perks of Being a
and
Wallflower.
this book it's perfectly normal. Is an amazing book about puberty that has often been censored. So it was great to be there with her and read these books aloud. Does it the quote, Judy's quote, brings up, I think, an important angle to all of this, which is like, we can read in the newspaper that Tango was pulled. We can organize around having a response to get Tango back in. What you don't read about is the biggest threat to read in America, and that is the chill on librarians and school librarians that's settled now, where I have to think, do I want to put myself on the line to? Understandably, people are not buying books, and people are not bringing books into their classroom, and people are choosing not to read books, and we will never hear about this. We won't know what new book isn't finding an audience because it's happening behind the scenes. That kind of is really insidious, and it kids like ours, all kids, of the kind of educational materials that we would really love.
Yeah.
And as I mentioned earlier, this amazing teacher who reached out to us, I want to protect her anonymity because she's in the trenches now, and there is that fear. But she mentioned that in her community, in a state that will stay anonymous, there were librarians that were getting death threats, and I can't even imagine that. People who love words and books, which brings me to another quote. And this one is from James Howe. He said, banning books is just another form of bullying. It's all about fear and an assumption of power. The key is to address the fear and to deny the power. So, what do we do when we have these politicians and pundits who are using your book, and Tango Makes Three, or our book, The Freedom Writer's Diary, for power, to get elected, to get teachers and librarians in the fear of challenging them? How do we deny that power? What can we do as ordinary citizens standing up to an extraordinary circumstance?
This, because I think, things have changed in terms of the needs over the course of the life of our book, possibly yours as well. Things have really changed. So at the beginning, the challenges were a parent was unsafe book, and that parent made a complaint about this one book, like that. Whether it's a parent who's unsettled or a principal or a superintendent, there's an opportunity for dialogue where we can talk about what we think is valuable about our book. We can ask them what they think is a problem. Those dialogues can happen within a community or between us and them. And there's an opportunity for learning to take place. What's happening now is very different. It's an exercise. You said it's an exercise in power. It seems to be for political gain. There is not an interest in learning. It's not even clear if our book has been read by the people.
Neither was I. Every time we've been challenged, I believe that the people, like it was Lester from Lester's Guns in Crete, Nebraska. I don't think he even picked up our book, but he challenged it anyway. So we had a grand dragon of the KKK in Howe, Michigan, who sent a handwritten note to the FBI saying that our book was pornography. So I believe that they did not read the book, but there was, innuendo or, fear that this book might allow a young person to have a voice. So I believe with you as well, that if somebody actually opened up your book and saw that love is love in forms and fashions, how could it have such ire and anger when it's so celebratory, with such a celebration of the animal kingdom and our kingdom?
Yeah. So that's why I think there isn't necessarily the kind of opportunity for dialogue now with this sort of, if somebody submits a list of they are challenging and they all have to be pulled and go into review, for dialogue so much as it is a call to find your own power to address the situation. That's where I think, our comment about organizing resistance, that's groups of people who are local to the community who feel that a book shouldn't be banned or books shouldn't be banned. They need to get together. And that means go en masse to a school board meeting. One of the things that we found out about the Loudoun, Virginia meeting, this was over a decade ago, they showed up in penguin costumes to the school board meeting. You can use, but use your power by organizing and pairing your voice with other voices. And I think that's the best we can do. That and go to the ballot box when it's time for a school board election.
You know what I love that Peter can probably empathize with is, you are in a community of writers. You are a playwright, but your brethren, my brethren in the Writers Guild America, WGA, both in Los Angeles, where I live, and New York, where you live, are literally on the picket lines now. And I love their pithy signs, but I love that you believe in standing in solidarity. And so for all of us that have seen those picketers and we bring out,
Yes.
coffee and signs, I think that we all have to celebrate, but also stand in solidarity when a book is banned. When a book is banned somewhere, it can be banned anywhere. So I love on that mug of yours, all of those authors of now and then, we stand in solidarity with them, because even authors as far back as Ralph Waldo Emerson said that every burned book enlightens the world. Yeah. So do you believe that that Tango Makes Three enlightens the world?
That's a sweet
That's a
idea. I
very,
mean, I love that idea.
sure.
You know, listen,
Sure.
the book has been around long enough that we started hearing stories like my son, who's gay, was packing for college, and he was taking just a few things that that really meant something to him, and he took your book. You know,
Ah, you know, when I closed the book, I wanted to weep, and I wanted to weep because it was such a celebration. I know I've used that word quite often talking to you today, but I love that word because it's so joyous. And when you think about banned and burning and censorship, it's so dark.
yeah,
It's so dreary. And I love that words can be a light in a very dark place. That a book creates a safe space. So for someone that's going to a dorm room away at school, that your book is that security blanket.
yeah.
Your book is the light in a
Mhm.
dark place. I love that. You know, our book oftentimes is the security blanket in jail cells. Our book is wildly read in juvenile halls and maximum security prisons. And I think the letters that we've enjoyed the most that we receive is from inmates who didn't have either of our books in their classes. And we actually got a $5 check from an inmate at Attica State Prison in New York, and saying that he wished that he had been taught the Freedom Writers Diary when he was in high school.
Mhm.
And you know, as a nonprofit, we've raised money from folks in the past, like the Gates Foundation. And I promise you, the $5 check that we got from the inmate at Attica meant more to me personally than a grant that we got from the Gates Foundation, because I just wondered what would make that gentleman sit down,
Yeah.
ask a warden for a pen and paper and a stamp to send us a letter. So, can you tell us about a letter that you've received from somebody in the world about your book that you've held dear, and that card and that stamp and opening up your mailbox was this beautiful rainbow?
Well, yes. As a matter of
Yeah.
there's a letter, in this was 16 years ago. There's a project called the Martin Luther King Living the Dream Award, and it was a award given by three fifth grade schools in New York City, one private school and two public schools, and they study and read a group of books over the course of many months, and kids who choose what they feel is a book that carries a message that's important to them. And one year in 2007, that's how Tango won that award, and we were asked to come to the celebration of it. It was moving because students from each school read essays in the fifth grade that they wrote about the book and about why the book was important to them. Afterwards, one of the librarians at Manhattan Country School sent us this letter. I'll only read part of it, but it says, it's from Callan Crash, who's a librarian there. Dear Justin and Peter, I'm writing to you both. Thank you on behalf of myself and all the people you met at the Book Awards celebration 2 weeks ago, especially the students. Your presentation was wonderful as well as remarkable. Manhattan Country School has held the Living the Dream Book Award for 17 years. This year, the Book Award moved the dream forward. One class of private children and two classes of public school children, 86 children in all, voted overwhelmingly for And Tango Makes Three to be the winner and showed the adults, several of us quite discouraged, the possibility of a world that could look quite different, a world where people are treated as equals. Justin, after one student writing the book affected you personally, you easily answered that you and Peter are partners, have an empty nest, and you might want to fill it. Humor, the word nest, comfortable with the fact that you are partners, all feel at ease and glad that we know you. This year's celebration and the children of the 2012 Living the Dream Book Award authors showed that the dream is possible. Thank you both for helping us along the way.
Ah,
And we
I want to
letter
weep because when our audience may not know why I want to weep is if that award was given to you in 2007, that in 2008 you got married, and in 2009 you brought somebody into your nest, and that's your beautiful daughter Gemma. Um, so it went full circle. You know,
Yes.
you and Tango makes Gemma. You know,
Yeah.
you're so when you read those letters and you hear of 86 children who chose you, does it bring tears to your eyes the way it's bringing tears to my eyes?
It does. And it did, rereading it again recently in light of what's going on, because it was an extraordinary day for us. And we have the award in the study, and we met these kids at the same time. It was 16 years ago. And we see in the ways in which there's been progress, and we see the ways in which we're also, as Judy, on the front lines of something that we have to get, that is so ongoing.
I love that. There's a wonderful woman who sent us a question. I don't know her, but her name is Edith. And I think this is a really profound question. So, Edith, if you're watching live, please let us know. Actually, don't say which book you want. You're going to get both. Send us your address, and you'll get Tango Makes Three and the Freedom Writers Diary just for submitting two questions. But I'll read one to both of you. Edith wants to know what harm, if any, is caused by having a book ban. So, what do you think is the harm that is happening from these politicians and parents and society that takes our books and others out of the hands of kids?
Well, I would just say, just think about one child in one class who's had our book taken out of their classroom, and that kid has two moms. And so just imagine the impact on that child of this message, that their community believe that her family deserves to be mentioned, that her family, that there's something about her family that's that needs to be from the school. And if you just one kid and the impact on that child's sense of themselves and their
Mm.
sense of belonging or inclusion or lack of belonging and inclusion, and then just multiply it by the thousands of kids who have gay parents, or thousands of kids who are growing up to be gay. I mean, the negative psychological impact, not to speak about even the effect on education or the effect on society, how we think about ourselves as a country, but just the psychological impact on on tender growing minds. It's devastating.
And the word you used made my heart leap about removed. You know, these as an English teacher, verbs and words are so important, and the negativity with this movement of removing, dismissing, when tango is all about inclusivity, when tango is all about celebrating diversity in forms and fashions. I think that's what I desperately wanted my students to do, was to find their voice at a time that they felt voiceless, and to write themselves into existence, and the urgency of the now. And ironically, both of our books have been out a long time, and they're on those lists. You know, when I download the list of 50 books in this particular state or 75 books in this particular state, our books are on those lists. So there will be students who start the academic school year in 2023 in the fall, and our books will not be in their hands.
Mhm.
And so, is there something that you want to say to all of the students who are listening? You know, we're going to empower those teachers to do, but what could we say to the students like Gemma, your daughter, who's going to start ninth grade, and all of those students who may live in communities that have banned not only our books but multiple books? What would you say to them?
I think they should tell their stories and find some way to get their stories out. I mean, that's what's so great. There has been this sort of democratization of of media, in that we can publish our other ways. We can find a way to get word out through social media or other platforms. And I think that's the answer for young people. Write your stories and send your stories out. Give them to your friends. Send them to Teen Ink magazine. Get them out into in whatever way you can.
Well, I want to end on a quote. This one, ironically, by Lyndon B. Johnson. And Lyndon B. Johnson said that books and ideas are the most effective weapons against intolerance and ignorance. And so, to our enlightened audience, may we pay this idea forward. May we stand in solidarity, and may free people continue to read freely. Thank you so much for joining us. Thank you so much to our audience that submitted questions. I can't wait to send books out. I love sending contraband books like The Freedom Writer's Diary, Tango Makes Two, and Tango Makes Three, and Dear Freedom Writer, to our audience that participated. Thank you so much for listening. Thank you so much for joining, and pay this amazing conversation forward to those that need to listen and those that need to learn. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.